Hey everyone, welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. Hey, if you can't hear it, you should see it. Because if you can know anything about me, John has taught me to anticipate things, and today I'm anticipating this podcast. Now, yes, we're the podcast that adds value to leaders who multiply value to others. But today we're even more than that, because in this special episode, we listened. We listened to you, our listeners, our viewers, and you requested, after hearing from Jeff Henderson last month, you asked for more episodes like that. So we have back in the studio with us today another one of our Maxwell Leadership thought leaders, and they are going to join with you and learn and grow. Today, we have in studio one of my very dear friends, somebody that's worked alongside John Maxwell longer than me. We have Tim Elmore in the studio to talk to you about You Got to Go First. You're going to love this. He's got an analogy that will stick as soon as you hear it. Now, here's the great thing. I tell you all the time, you need to go to YouTube. You need to view this by YouTube. Join us on YouTube. Today, you snooze and lose if you don't go to YouTube, because Tim brought a PowerPoint deck. And Jake has created it so that it's going to create an online experience for you at YouTube. Now, all of our listeners, thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of you, you're still going to get the same quality podcast. But if you want to see it by YouTube, go to maxwellpodcast.com/YouTube. Also, if you would like to download the bonus resource for this episode, which is a free fill-in-the-blank PDF that accompanies Tim's lesson, just visit maxwellpodcast.com/go first and click the bonus resource button. Now, if you're listening by YouTube, watching by YouTube, get ready. If you're listening, grab a pen, grab a paper. Here is Tim Elmore.
I'm pretty excited to talk to you all today about going first as a leader. And what I've done is I've selected a metaphor. I actually call it a habitude. Some of you already know this. Habitudes are images that form leadership habits and attitudes. And the one I've chosen today is one of my newest, and it's found in the New Kind of Diversity book, but I think you're going to love it because it just is playing out right now before my eyes almost everywhere I go. I call this image guard dogs or guide dogs. Now, I know it's kind of cheesy, but think with me for a minute. We have given canines many jobs over the years. Would you agree? I mean, service jobs are everywhere. You see service dogs in airports and wherever you go. But two of the most common jobs we've given dogs are the guard dog and the guide dog. But their jobs are fundamentally different. Think with me. The guard dog's job is to protect, right? They're usually in some fenced-in area and they're sniffing out trouble there and growling at intruders and barking at anything that might pop up. They're just there to protect. The guide dog's job is to partner. In fact, I'll never forget a few years ago speaking in Virginia, and the man that spoke before me on the docket that day was completely blind. Fortunately for him and all of us, he had a guide dog named Scout. Scout was rightfully named. Scout walked him up to the platform when it was his turn, walked him up the stairs, walked him across the stage, stopped right at the podium, and, this speaker grabbed the podium and gave his speech. Scout must have known the last phrase of the speech because he stood up right at the last phrase, guided the man across the stage, back down the steps, and over to his seat, and both sat down. And I thought to myself when they sat down, what a great leader. And I wasn't talking about the human being. I was talking about the dog. Think with me. While the guard dog is always protecting, growling, barking, sniffing at trouble, the guide dog's job is to stay close, to go first, take the first step, to be vulnerable, to initiate on behalf of others. So he exists to partner. And the reason I keep underscoring that is I believe we default to one of these two as leaders. You see, especially in times of trouble, but almost every day of our lives, we naturally default to guard dog. We are self-protecting. We are guarding our assets, guarding our funding, guarding our bottom line. You know what I'm talking about. It's just what we do as humans. So of these two canine jobs, the protecting and the partnering, we tend to protect more often than we partner. It's just what we're prone to do. So let me read something I've written down that I think will summarize this for you and illustrate why the science behind this thing is so powerful. So when we are in groups or on teams, our brain lights up differently depending on the social cues we exchange with others. The paradox is belonging actually works from the outside in. When vulnerability cues are sent, we move from guard dog to guide dog. Our brains light up socially when steady diets of cues are sent. We are close, we are safe, we share a future. Now, you see, smart leaders get into anxious times and they realize, while I want to protect all my assets right now, what my people need is a guide dog, not a guard dog. They need me to tip my hand, perhaps to get vulnerable, perhaps to be transparent and be the first one to set that cue. But folks, it's a conscious decision. Here's why. I mentioned our brain just a minute ago. I am not a neuroscientist. You'll never mistake me for a neuroscientist. But what I understand about our amygdala in our brain is it's been a game changer for me as a leader. You see, the amygdala is part of our brain. It's a small membrane. It's like a large almond. In fact, the Latin word for amygdala is almond. So the amygdala is constantly scanning the landscape, looking for cues from others all the time. And it lights up when seeing the need to protect. It's the fight, flight, or freeze. You've all heard that, haven't you? Okay, fight or flight or get out of there, all right? Now watch this. It lights up in a different way when safety cues are sent from leaders or from others. Someone cares, understands, and empathizes. It leans into partner. Now, what I'm saying is your people all around you, if you're a leader, they're going to be looking for cues from you. They will be no more transparent than you are on that team or in that group. And if you want honesty and trust and transparency, you got to go first. Let me illustrate this in a brilliant way. Some of you know the name Allison Wood Brooke. She's at Harvard Business Review and publishes some great stuff from time to time. She conducted an experiment where she asked more than 400 people to respond to 2 scenarios and to see the difference in their responses. I want you listeners right now to listen to these 2 scenarios and see what you would do in each of these scenarios, okay? So here's scenario number 1. Imagine this. You're at a train station. It's raining. A stranger approaches you to ask, "Can I borrow your cell phone?" Scenario 2. You're at a train station. It's raining. A stranger approaches and says, "I'm so sorry about this rain. Can I borrow your cell phone?" Now, there was only one sentence difference. Did you catch that? But when Allison and her team asked the audience, her group of respondents, would there be any change in how people would respond? Almost everybody said there'd be no difference in either one. In other words, when a stranger asks for your cell phone, you're not going to give the stranger your cell phone. And they were wrong. When they actually conducted the experiment, get this, 422% more people said yes to giving a stranger the cell phone on the second scenario, meaning that tiny hint of, "I'm so sorry about this rain," gave a signal of humanity. I care about you. I'm about to ask you for something, but I care about you. We're humans before we're X's or O's on a chart. So what I'm suggesting to you real quick is this. The key to this is vulnerability. Are you able and willing to be vulnerable with your team? There's an assignment I gave myself this year. When I speak in a meeting, I want to speak as if I believe I'm right. I want to have some conviction, but I want to listen as if I believe I'm wrong. And that has been a game changer. A few years ago, I met Scott Drew. Some of you know, if you're a basketball fan, a college basketball fan, you know the name Scott Drew. Scott Drew is the Baylor University men's basketball coach, and in 2021, he led the Baylor men to a national championship. First one Baylor had ever won. Scott brilliantly modeled this principle that year. You see, when the basketball season started, Scott decided instead of just jumping into practice, he did some really fun, crazy activities with his men's team. Now, you know, basketball players are studs, right? They're not only males, they're athletes, okay? So he did some team building games, some fun games, dunking contest, pie making activities. It was just kind of crazy. At the end of his few days together, just getting acquainted and bonding, Coach Drew sat down with his men and he said, "Can I ask you a strange question? And I want to hear from every one of you. What are you most afraid of right now?" Well, all of them were stunned in silence because they thought, "What the heck are you asking me that question for? I'm a guy, or whatever." But he said, No, I want you to answer. What are you most afraid of?" And when they were quiet for another moment, he said, "Let me lead off." And it was at that moment that Coach Drew looked at his men in the eye and said, "Do you know what I was afraid of? I was afraid you were going to leave me. I was afraid someone was going to persuade you from playing on this team. I'm no Coach K at Duke basketball. I'm no legendary coach. I'm Scott Drew. And I was just afraid that you would leave me." Well, this just caused every one of them to open up. They not only said, "Coach, I'm not leaving you," they went on to win a championship. And he would say it was the bonding, not just the talent, that won that championship. Can I say that again? It was the bonding, not just the talent, that won the championship. For years, I've enjoyed the undeserved privilege of partnering with sports teams like Baylor basketball, but the Kansas City Royals have been just great, great friends along the last 10, 12 years. And I remember one particular year I was with all the minor league players, sharing some habitudes, and then I talked to all the managers and coaches. Vance Wilson was the AAA coach that year, and he came up to me and he said, "Tim, I need to tell you what happened this year when we were discussing these habitudes." I said, "Well, tell me." He said, "Well, I was leading a habitude discussion one week in our clubhouse, and he said my third baseman, Mike, was just staring at the floor like he wasn't paying attention." So I finished up, and I said, "All right, let's go take BP. Let's take batting practice." Everybody runs out into the field except for Mike, this third baseman. And when Mike finally got up, he walked over to him and he said, "Coach, would you mind if I led the lesson next week?" I said, "Man, no, I didn't think you were paying attention. Of course, lead the lesson." The next week, when Mike stepped up, he looked at his fellow players and he kind of stumbled over his words because, he's a third baseman. He's not a public speaker. But he finally said, "Do you all know what I got in my back pocket?" Well, nobody answered. They said, chewing tobacco, whatever. And he reached in his back pocket and he pulled out a rope. It was a noose. Mike was going to hang himself that next weekend. He said, "The reason I have this is I was going to kill myself." He said, "I broke up with my girlfriend. I'm in a hitting slump right now. I'm not going to make the majors. My parents are mad at me. I just didn't see a reason to go on." But then he looked at his fellow teammates and he said, "But I realized last week, having this discussion, you guys are my family. This team, you're my family." Well, you can imagine every one of those other 25 guys just opened up and they're all bonding now because somebody led the way. Somebody was a guide dog, not a guard dog. And Vance said, "Tim, I got to be honest with you, we won the national championship that we won the league championship." Now, I am not promising you win championships when you become guide dog, although you better your chances. So one last bit before I wrap up, and I want to talk to Mark Cole about how we're applying this at Maxwell Leadership. But Jay Van Bavel, a social neuroscientist at NYU, said this, and I think it's brilliant. The moment you're part of a group, the amygdala tunes in to who's in that group and starts intensely tracking them. These people were strangers before. Now they're important to you. It's such a powerful switch, a total reconfiguration of the entire motivational decision-making system. The whole dynamic changes. So your action steps, can I give them to you? You must go first. I must go first. Don't wait for someone else to be vulnerable first. Number 2, I must model transparency. I got to open up my heart just a little bit and be that guide dog for those that may not be able to see as clearly as I see. I must be vulnerable. That's what I've been talking about this whole time. And then lastly, I must trust. Mark, I'm going to stop there and kind of turn it back over to you to dialogue about this.
Yeah, every time I sit down with you and I just become better at connecting with all types, all generation types, just the way that leaders look. When you give these images, and we're going to talk more about guard dog, guide dog in just a moment and how we're applying it here. But Tim, you have a unique gift, and you've picked up on that podcast family, this unique gift to take images that apply to all ages and begin to drive leadership behavior into that. In fact, before we dialogue, let me just tell all of you that maybe this is the first time you've ever heard the name Tim Elmore. There's a couple of ways that you can follow Tim right now. One is pick up his book, New Kind of Diversity. This is talking about how in the workplace, we now have 5 generations. Is that right?
That's right.
5 generations that we as leaders are trying to lead at the same time, and all 5 do not think the same.
That is true.
And so, Tim, it's an incredible practical guide and yet very edifying, inspiring guide of how to mobilize all these different diverse thinking from a generational perspective and get one functioning team to do great things. We'll put this in the show note. You can pick this book up. We'll give you a 15% discount on that. The other thing, Tim travels all over the place. In fact, I'm glad you're in Atlanta and able to talk now. Tim travels speaking to businesses, nonprofits, sports teams, sports organizations. And if you want more of that, more information on that, we'll put in the show notes how you can book Tim. If you don't want to go to the show notes, you can go to maxwellleadership.com, go to our speakers. Tim's right there. We'll help you get Tim into your area. But Tim, I sit here and I went, what happens if I see both of me in those?
Yeah.
You know, because I guess leaders do go through sometimes like that.
No doubt. In fact, I would say on any given day, I might be both. You know, at 10 a.m., I'm a guide dog. At 3 p.m., I'm a guard dog. And it's the environment. It's the circumstance. Yeah. I even think about my little dog, Sadie. She's a guide dog. As a puppy, she turned it into a guard dog. So it happens, and I think it's part of us just responding to the feeling threatened or feeling things are scarce or abundant, and so it happens every day.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to just getting into it, but I think this piece on vulnerability and how each of us can lead our team better is something that the world needs to hear.
Well, Mark, if you don't mind, I want to toss some questions to you about this because I feel as though you gave us a clinic about this very thing. You didn't call it guard dog or guide dog, but it's really what you were. So do you mind disclosing a little bit? You recently saw this play out. You did a listening tour. Talk about that.
Well, so I'm learning, and our podcast family knows this, Tim. You know this. All God's children knows this right now. I'm in a new area of leadership. I've worked for dynamic visionaries like yourself, like John Maxwell, and I've implemented someone else's vision all of my leadership. Yeah. And now it's my task, it's my responsibility, it's my privilege to be able to envision the future and then motivate people around this vision that I have.
Yeah.
I learned how to motivate people around somebody else's vision, but how do I motivate them around mine? And I got to tell you, I started out in 2020, 2021, I'm the guard dog. I protected this. I got this. This is mine. Yeah. You're not. Get in line.
Yeah.
And just really driving. Something really interesting happened to me last August, September. I began to realize that the organization had developed a culture that I was not pleased with, and I couldn't blame it on anybody else anymore. It was my culture.
Yeah.
It wasn't somebody else's. It wasn't because of somebody else's decisions. It was my decisions.
Yeah.
And so I felt really prompted to go and do a listening tour. We call it, you've heard fireside chats, you've heard town hall meetings. We called ours family rooms.
Yeah.
We just went and put 10 to 15 people about 18 times.
Yeah.
I went and just did a listening tour to say, hey, tell me what it's like to be on the other side of me. And I will tell you, Tim, coming out of that, I felt a passion to be more of a guide to help us get from where we all determined we didn't want to be to where we ultimately envisioned, rather than coming out there and going, okay, I got it. Let's go. And that vulnerability that we had is easier to continue. That was a very vulnerable moment. You were in.
Yeah. I was there.
But it's been a very vulnerable moment to lead from that too. And we have good days.
Yeah.
We have some days that's not so good.
Yeah. Interesting. So I would like to, if you don't mind, get inside yourself for leaders who are listening. What drove you to be vulnerable? You obviously shifted gears a bit from everything's great to, ooh, it may not be great. And when you tip your hand, you run the risk, don't you, of, what if they don't respect me anymore? No, I'm telling them I'm a loser, or I don't have all this right. But you did it anyway, and I think it won us over.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I've watched, and I'd be interested in what you say about this too, but I've watched John Maxwell lead from a position of security.
Yeah.
He's very
No doubt.
comfortable in his own skin. I bet you are too. And again, if there's something that strikes a chord here, certainly speak back to me on how a leader gets comfortable in his own skin or in her own skin. For me, I began to realize I put all this expectation on me that I've got to know how to be a visionary leader.
Yeah.
Well, sitting in those family rooms, number one, I just got frustrated with myself.
Yeah.
Then I got very humble.
Yeah.
And then I got very vulnerable. So I would tell you that I think vulnerability starts with humility.
Yeah, I do
when
too.
we realize, hey, it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay that I can admit that this is the first time I've ever had to lead like this. And I will tell you, on the days that I feel like getting back into that guard dog mentality, I go back to that level of humility, Tim, to go, I cannot believe what I get to do on a daily basis. I'm sitting here with you right now. There will be a couple 100,000 people that'll listen to this podcast right here. And we're just talking to women and men about how to make sure, just a great little pictorial perspective that we will be able to draw from. Are you wanting to be a guard dog? You want to be a guide dog? And so I would come back and say, I think humility is what drives that vulnerability. And then I think the other thing is the reward that you get.
Yes.
Do you know how many people, Tim, came to me and said, I respect you more as my leader right now than I did the last 20 years?
Yeah.
For having a family room?
Yeah.
No, from being vulnerable, from being approachable. Too many times, there is a success gap between leaders and people that want to be, and we put the success gap is a mirage.
Yeah,
I agree. Not accurate because leaders struggle and have difficulty and have failures as well.
No, I think you're right. In fact, I would say, I think everybody knows when you don't have the answer to pretend we do. They go, oh no, you're making it worse, Bob. You know, pretend is taken from the word pretense. We're faking it. And I think when we get real, they go, oh, good. We all knew. Yeah. Thank you for being open. And Mark, I'm telling you, we all loved you more. We leaned in more. Yep. It was a good thing. Yeah,
I felt that.
So I want to ask you more of a theoretical question. I think people listening would be asking this question. Why do you think leaders struggle with this?
So it's a good question. And again, bounce back and forth with me on this because you've worked with a lot of leaders, been around John a long time as well. I think that leaders struggle because there's something innate in us, a high degree of responsibility perhaps, that it's the ownership principle. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. It's mine to accomplish. And so when we come and we have to communicate, we don't have all the answers, we somehow feel like a derelict of our leadership responsibilities.
Yes, that makes sense.
We feel like that to say I don't know is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of incorrect positioning. I'm not supposed to be the leader if I don't know. I'm not supposed to be the one here. So I think it's really hard for leaders. It's really easy to pick on the egotistical ones, right? The guys that think they know everything and they act all this, and you go, you're cocky is the reason you can't be vulnerable. That's not always the truth. In fact, that's too broad of a characterization. There is some great leaders that are vulnerable and humble at the heart that still can't say, I don't know and I messed up because we feel like that we're then saying you can't have confidence in a leader that doesn't know.
Yeah, that's well put. In fact, I would say when we practice what you just preached, people tend to lean in. They go, I want to help you get the answer then if you don't know it, because you've just won me over at the heart level. I mean, I think about Bob Iger, who had to do this when he first took over in 2006 at Disney, and others. It's such a brilliant but counterintuitive thing to leadership because we're supposed to have the answers. You know what went through my mind as you were talking? It's not the leader's job to make all the decisions. It's the leader's job to make sure good decisions are made, even if it's made by a Chris Godey or someone else. And that's what I think you've done so well.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I love to do, Tim, and I learned this from people like you, from John Maxwell. What I love to do is I love to come into a meeting and say, what do I need to know?
Yeah.
When I come into a meeting saying, what do I need to know, rather than let me tell you what I already know, I usually get a lot more information that I didn't know.
Yeah.
So when I come in, my first question is, what do I need to know? And then I love to ask the question, if you were me, what decision would you make right
Wow.
here? I get that kind of perspective. Then it's time, in my opinion, for the leader to issue the responsible, the task, the reason you're the leader,
Yeah.
set the direction.
That's
But I
right.
always follow up with this right here, Tim, and I think this is a kicker. When I set that direction, I've listened. What do I need to know? What would you do if you were me? I've listened. Now I set the direction, and then I always follow up with this final question. What am I missing?
Yeah. Good.
And when I set that direction and I ask, what am I missing? Everybody feels like two things. One, he's approachable.
Yep.
Number two, they feel like we made that decision together. I told him what he was missing.
Yeah.
And off we go.
I love it. I
Yeah.
think that's so spot on, leadership-wise and psychologically.
Yeah.
All right, one last question.
Okay.
What steps did you take internally, or what steps led you to practice this that others could perhaps emulate?
Well, I think if you want to go and you find yourself in this guard dog mentality, and I don't think you're saying, and I certainly wouldn't want to say, that there's not times that we need to be that guard dog.
Yeah,
And
that's
we,
true.
We need to protect.
There is a moment when
There's a
protection
moment.
is the right move. Yeah.
But most of the time, we should be
Yeah.
operating in the guide dog mentality. I think, Tim, again, something that I watch you do, I think getting an inner circle, someone's that can give you a perspective of, whoa, Mark, you're straining at the leash a little bit right here, Mr. Guard Dog.
Yep.
I think having an inner circle that can really speak into you is a very practical step that I have, and I give them this picture. Hey, guys, guard dog, guide dog.
Yep.
What am I being
Yep.
right here? Because you've given us, team, podcast listeners, especially those of you on YouTube, you saw what Tim's talking about here. So there is an inner circle responsibility. I'll tell you the second thing that I really work hard at a humility meter. How am I feeling in this moment as it relates to overconfident or over humble? I think either one will get you into a place. An over humble leader is hard to follow because you're trying.
That's
You're
right.
trying to go. Do you have a direction? Are we
Yeah,
going
that's
anywhere?
right.
So I think it's really paying attention to where I am with that kind of indication on that. And then finally, what I would tell you to do. You have a resource that I think really helps with this called Habitudes.
Yeah.
And you can find that at growingleaders.com. You can see some of the. Tim, you have a lot of pictures like this. In fact, we're going to have you back and get you to do another
Okay, that'd be
picture,
fun.
okay? And do that. I really do want to do that this year. But it's getting myself in, and here's why I do that. So I do that for personal consumption. Go find a habitude; it'll help you. But I do that so I can establish common language in the organization.
Yeah.
So now here's what we've done. You mentioned the fireside chats that we call family rooms. We now know, hey, go back to the family room.
Yep.
We've now created common
It's a reference
culture.
point.
It's a reference point. And what you've done with the picture today is you've shown us we can put a reference point, and people in the room with you, in the leadership room, has now common language to say, this is how I'm leading, this is how I should be leading.
I love it.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to tell you again, for those of you watching, those of you listening, I know you've enjoyed Tim. I certainly have. I sit here and just took notes. Your go first, model transparency, be vulnerable, always trust. That practical way that you can make sure that you're staying in the guide dog perspective. Hey, for those of you that